So today we're going to be answering a question from Donna Ricker of Louisville, Kentucky. And she asks, as I work on different projects, I toss my scraps into a big bin. When I finally need them, I am overwhelmed and I don't know where to start. How do I organize my scraps so that I can actually use them? So for something so small, scraps can be a big problem, especially if you don't have a method to organize them. So I'm going to have everyone take a little quiz right now to find out their ideal scrap saving philosophy. So it's kind of hard to do a quiz over video, so we'll take it slow and you'll just kind of need to remember a few answers as we move through it. Did you get your answer? Now that you have an idea of how sorting scraps may work best for you, let's talk about them a little more. So if you organize scraps by size, it allows you to choose patterns that use many of the same size pieces over and over again, such as those with triangle squares, flying geese, 4-patch units. So quilters who sort by size, maybe they like to play with contrast, like light and dark fabrics, but aren't overly concerned about the color schemes of their quilts. They tend to like that little sparkle that comes when you're using a variety of fabrics and colors in repeated units. So if you're sorting by size, ask yourself, do you love making quilts that use pre-cuts? If so, you may want to cut your scraps into the largest usable pre-cut size, such as 10 inches, 5 inches, 2.5-inch squares, or 2.5-inch wide strips. What are your favorite blocks to make? So if you find yourself piecing a lot of, let's say, flying geese units, you may want to cut background fabrics, such as whites, creams, into squares, and darker fabrics into rectangles for those flying geese. And then you can ask yourself, do you like strip piecing or string piecing? So in that case, you may want to cut leftover fabrics into strips of different widths, such as 1.5, 2, 2.5, or even 3 inches. If you organize scraps by color, it allows you to choose seasonal or holiday quilts or projects that use color placement to highlight a design. So quilters who organize by color tend to like more limited color palettes. So if you're sorting by color, ask yourself, how do you define a background color? So you may be able to store all of your whites, creams, even light grays and low volume scraps together. But if you like to be more specific with your background colors, that may not be the best option. How detailed do you want to get? So for example, how do you define blue? Is it dark and light blues? Does it include teals and aquas? Do you want to separate by shades? So these are some things to think about. And lastly, what colors do you use most in your quilts? So you can store the scraps of colors you use the most often in your larger containers, and then save your smaller containers for those colors that you use less of. And not everyone makes quilts suited for scraps. So if you prefer to make quilts with larger blocks or a very specific planned color palette, you might not be able to incorporate those small bits of fabric. In that case, you may want to collect your scraps in one container and possibly donate them to a local organization in need. Now I wanted to give everyone a little look at my own scrap storage. It is nothing fancy at all, but I think it's always fun to kind of see how other people's fabric collections look. So I personally sort my fabric scraps by size and then color. So I used to only save scraps that were 2.5 inches square. So I cut everything into those measurements and then I organized them by color. So I just store them in this Ziploc bag, nothing crazy, but I chose this size because there are tons of patterns out there that use many charm squares. So this size works great for English paper piecing too, and it was just a really simple way to store my scraps. They didn't take up much room this way. So over the years, I have made many scrap quilts with these 2.5-inch squares. So I decided to start saving strips instead. So you'll see I have strips sorted by color in this box I have, and then this little tin. And I cut my strips anywhere between 1 inch wide to 2.5 inch wide, depending on what size I'm left with. And I plan to use them to make some string pieced quilts, maybe some log cabin quilts, and definitely a pineapple block quilt.